mansion. My name is Ethan, and I grew up in a typical household. My parents earned a decent income, but we were far from wealthy. I had an older sister, who was 7 years my senior, and she was always the favorite. Our parents sent her to an elite private school that offered everything imaginable, while I attended the local public school. It wasn't terrible, but the disparity was glaring. I vividly remember when I was around 10 years old, watching a music video featuring an incredible singer. I was so inspired that I rushed to my dad. "Dad, can I take singing lessons?" I asked eagerly. He looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "Singing lessons, Ethan? Don't be ridiculous. That's just a hobby. You need to focus on a real career when you grow up." My mom chimed in, "Your sister is the smart one in the family. You'll have to work with your hands, sweetie. There's no point in wasting money on singing lessons." I felt crushed, but I refused to give up. I began searching for singing lessons online and practiced in my room, trying to keep my voice down so my parents wouldn't get upset. Still, I often heard them shout, "Ethan, stop that noise." Things might have continued in that vein if it weren't for my Uncle Robert. He was my dad's brother, had no children, and worked as a dentist. He earned a good living and, for some reason, genuinely enjoyed spending time with me. One day, he overheard me singing in my room. I felt embarrassed, but he simply smiled and said, "Ethan, that was beautiful. Why didn't you tell me you could sing?" I shrugged, my face turning crimson. "Mom and Dad say it's silly," I mumbled. Uncle Robert's expression shifted, as if he were trying to suppress a frown. "Well, I think it's amazing. How about we get you some real lessons?" From that moment on, everything changed. Uncle Robert became my biggest advocate. He bought me a small keyboard, and we spent countless hours learning songs together. It felt like a whole new world had opened up for me. When my parents discovered I was taking singing lessons, they were furious. My dad even had the audacity to tell Uncle Robert, "You should be giving that money to our daughter instead." But Uncle Robert just smiled calmly and replied, "I believe Ethan has real talent. I'm happy to support him." That was the first time someone had stood up for me like that, and it made me feel seen, as if I wasn't just the family disappointment after all. While I was working hard to keep up with my singing lessons, my sister was living a charmed life. One evening, she came home bubbling with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I want to play soccer," she announced at dinner. I nearly choked on my food. Just last month, it was basketball, before that, it was swimming, and don't even get me started on her brief obsession with gymnastics. Did our parents hesitate? Not at all. My mom nodded enthusiastically and said, "Of course, honey. We'll sign you up tomorrow." Unsurprisingly, soccer didn't last long either. Just like all her other sports, she quit after a while. Then came the gaming phase. "I need a top-of-the-line gaming computer," she declared one day, "and my own room for training in competitions." I thought, this is it. Mom and Dad will finally say no. But no, they just nodded like bobbleheads. "Of course, sweetheart," my dad said. "We'll set everything up for you." And they did. They transformed the guest room into her personal gaming space, and the computer they bought her cost more than all my clothes combined. Meanwhile, I was still sharing a room and playing music on a second-hand keyboard that had been passed down from my cousins. The worst part was the wall of fame in our living room. It was a massive display of all my sister's so-called achievements, participation certificates from every sport she had quit, awards from her prestigious private school, and even a Best Smile certificate from her third-grade yearbook. And me? Not a single thing. Not even a tiny space for my straight A's or the singing competition I had won at school. Things took a turn for the worse when it was time for college. Naturally, my sister got accepted into a top-tier Ivy League school, and my parents were overjoyed. They paid for everything, her tuition, a luxurious apartment off campus, a brand new car, the works. 5 years passed, and I focused on my singing, my studies, and anything else to distract myself from the overwhelming sense of injustice. Throughout it all, Uncle Robert was my some money set aside for my college. It wasn't a fortune, but it would cover the essentials, or so I thought. One morning, about a month after my sister and Patrick moved in, my parents summoned me to the living room. The moment I saw their expressions, I sensed something was off. "Ethan," my mom began, her voice stiff and serious, "we need to talk about your future. We've decided to use your college fund to cover your living expenses for the past 19 years. I blinked, convinced I must have misheard her. "What?" I stammered. My mom wouldn't meet my gaze. "You're an adult now. It's time for you to start paying your own way." The room began to spin. "But what about college? I was counting on that money." My dad's expression hardened. "Your sister is married now. She needs more space and money for her family. We're giving her your room." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So what? I'm just supposed to leave? Where am I supposed to go?" "You'll need to find a job and a place to live," my mom said, as if it were no big deal. "You won't be able to afford college without that money." Something inside me snapped. For the first time, I felt a surge of real anger toward my parents. "You can't do this. I'm your son. This is my home too." For a moment, no one moved. Then my dad stormed out of the room. I thought maybe he was reconsidering, but he returned with a suitcase. "Fine," he said angrily. "If you won't leave, I'll pack for you." He began tossing my belongings haphazardly into the suitcase. I stood frozen in shock, and that's when I noticed my sister and Patrick standing in the doorway, watching with smug smiles on their faces. Something inside me broke. This wasn't my family, these weren't the people who were supposed to love and support me. I pushed past my dad and started packing my own things. I grabbed my clothes, a few pieces of jewelry, and most importantly, the music books and recordings Uncle Robert had given me over the years. Nobody said a word, nobody tried to stop me. When I walked out the front door, dragging my suitcase behind me, no one called me back. I found myself standing in front of Uncle Robert's house, my entire life packed into one small suitcase. When he opened the door and saw my tear-streaked face, he didn't ask questions. He simply pulled me into a hug and said, "Oh, Ethan, come in, son." That night, over a cup of hot cocoa, I poured my heart out to him. Uncle Robert listened, his expression growing darker with each word. When I finished, he took my hand and squeezed it tightly. "You're staying here," he said firmly. "Tomorrow, we're going to figure out your future." That night, I slept better than I had in years. I finally felt like I was somewhere I was wanted. The next morning, Uncle Robert surprised me. "I'm paying for your college," he announced over breakfast. "I've been saving for years, hoping to help you chase your dreams. That's what this money is for." Over the next few weeks, we researched colleges. Uncle Robert suggested I look for programs that combine singing and acting. "You've got a gift, Ethan," he said. "Let's find a place where you can shine." We eventually settled on a performing arts college in a city a few hours away. It had a stellar reputation and offered the exact training I had always dreamed of. When the entrance exams came, Uncle Robert took time off work and drove me there himself. I sang my heart out, pouring every ounce of emotion into my performance. When I finished, the judges were silent for a moment before breaking into applause. A week later, I received my acceptance letter. I was in. From that moment on, I dedicated myself fully to my studies. I immersed myself in every class, every rehearsal, and every late-night practice. I signed up for every singing competition I could find and performed in every amateur theater production that would have me. If there was a role in a musical, no matter how small, I took it. I was on that stage, giving my all. Before I knew it, 5 years had passed. I graduated with honors, and my final showcase performance received a standing ovation. That's when everything changed. A talent scout from a major musical theater company was in the audience that night. After the show, he rushed over, speaking rapidly about my talent and the opportunities awaiting me. The next thing I knew, I was signing a contract with one of the biggest names in the business. Suddenly, I wasn't just performing in college plays or small inheritance, and we wanted to reach out. "Hi, Dad," I said, forcing a smile into my voice. "Can I come in?" They let me stay, but I could tell I wasn't truly welcome. The house felt different, colder somehow. And guess what? My sister was still living there. Apparently, her husband had been kicked out. Dad mumbled something about Patrick playing video games all day and refusing to help out or get a job. I endured their cold silence and judgmental glances, ready to leave when my sister cornered me in the kitchen. She smirked. So, still chasing that silly singing dream? Let me guess, you're performing in some cheap little bar now? Something inside me snapped. I stood up straight, looked her in the eye, and said, actually, I'm the lead singer in several successful musicals, and I'm doing quite well for myself, thank you. You should have seen their faces, it was like someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly, Mom and Dad couldn't stop asking questions. Musicals, really? Mom asked, her interest piqued. How much do you make? I tried to leave, but Dad blocked the door. You must be making good money, he insisted. How much is your contract worth? That's private, I said, trying to step past him. Mom's face turned serious. Now listen here, young man. After everything we've done for you, you owe us. We're your parents, you're supposed to help us and your sister. Just like that, I felt like I was 19 again, standing in the same house, being told I wasn't worth investing in. But this time, I wasn't that scared, insecure boy anymore. I looked them in the eye and said, I don't owe you anything. You kicked me out, remember? You told me I wasn't worth supporting. Well, guess what? I made it without you, and I don't need you now. I walked out and went straight to Uncle Robert's house. He took one look at my face and opened his arms. As I hugged him, I knew this was my real family, this was home. But life has a cruel way of taking away happiness